Whether it's ancient combat or modern sport, winning is what it's all about.
I have to conquer a skill that I know absolutely nothing about.
But how do you win?
The History Channel car is history.
This man has learned the hard way. Now he's ready to show you.
This is the valiant knight of the Middle Ages, the ideal of honor, chivalry, courage, and a killing machine. And how does one become a knight? You start as a squire. No mere servant, he's well bred of landowners and has been preparing for combat from the day he was born. The challenge for our Conquest team is to train as squires did, to become knights themselves.
You're all young men of good family sometime in the Middle Ages. You're all squires. Question is, how do you become knights in armour? Now, these were like the top guns of the day, and instead of climbing into a jet fighter, they climbed into their armour, they jumped onto a horse, and they rode onto the battlefield. And the battlefield was ruled by the mounted knight in mail armour. Your task as our combat team is to find out how the knight in armour works, his strengths, his weaknesses, why he was so successful. We need to learn how to win as knights in armour.
Unlike the squires of old, who had years to train, our team only has a few days. Understanding the equipment of knighthood is a good place to start.
Mail was probably used by the Assyrians as early as the 6th century BCE. The Romans certainly had it by about 250 BCE. They used it extensively. Basically, it was a defense of interlocking iron rings. Now, these were usually either riveted or butted together. They had to be made by hand, and they were incredibly heavy and really expensive. Now, Finn, would you come over here a minute? Would you tell us how much you weigh?
It's about 160 pounds.
160 pounds. OK, stand on that. Do we have a sword for him and a shield? OK, there's your shield. Right. Take a sword. Right, and here's some mail gloves too. You're probably going to be wearing some of those and a few other bits of kit as well. How much do you weigh now? That's 220 pounds. So you've put on an extra 60 pounds, right? Basically, you're fully equipped now. Let's have a look at you. With your mail hauberk, your coif, your helmet, your shield, maybe your mail gloves, your sword, and you're pretty heavy. But this was the state-of-the-art defense from the 4th century to the 14th, 1,000 years. The question is, how good really was it?
To answer that question, we're putting our squires up against a perfectly defenseless shirt of mail. It might stop arrows fired from a distance, but not from close range. And the team is very anxious to see how mail holds up to spear, sword, mace, and axe.
OK.
The spear gets the first lick.
That's pierced it. Now sword. That's pierced it. No difficulty at all. OK.
The team obviously enjoys their work, as long as they're on the delivery end of the weapons.
OK. How to go with the mace? But you've broken the shoulder beneath him, but you haven't actually gone through his mail.
No.
So that's the use of the mace.
Okay.
Break the bones beneath it.
Okay, though, right?
All right, let's see what the axe does. Right, so we now know. Mail has its uses, but frankly, if you get in close enough and hit hard enough with the right weapons, you don't stand a chance. Of course, the trick is not to let your opponent hit you in the first place. And for that, you need this. The shield. They come in various shapes and weights for foot and mounted combat. You can have a shield strong enough to withstand the heaviest blows. But the heavier the shield, the less useful it is.
Useful as weapons themselves, that is. This is another important lesson for the squire. With practice, he could learn to slash with his shield's edge, or smash at close quarters with the raised boss. Which brings us to another crucial piece of the knight's wardrobe.
The most vulnerable part of the body is the head, and especially the shoulders. The collarbone here particularly is a perfect target for any sword, and especially an axe, and your collarbone can snap like that. It's essential, and it's essential for us too. Even in this practice, it can get dangerous. We must always wear these. Can you sort me out? The idea of these is not just to protect the head. It also gives a double layer of male protection for the shoulders here. Now, most of the helmets we're using are these. Plain old helmet with a camail often attached with a nasal piece. That gradually developed into eyepieces, sometimes cheek pieces, and coming down the neck, until finally we end up with this horrific thing, which is the great helm. All right, here we go.
At 20 pounds, the great helm covered the whole head and was thick enough to withstand heavy blows without being crushed. But it does have some drawbacks. It's extremely heavy. You can't see much out of those pitiful eye slots. You can't breathe through the tiny air holes. You just roast in this thing.
All right, let's take a break. This is absolutely exhausting. Now look, what you're feeling right now is what these guys must have felt after just a few minutes of battle.
Really tired.
The knights of the Middle Ages had the same problem. Every bit of armour they put on gave them additional weight.
My hips hurt and my shoulders hurt.
And they were more and more exhausted. And we've been fighting in just a few minutes, we can hardly breathe.
They smell.
They were often at it all day, so we have to build up stamina.
Hard work, hard work.
Most people on the battlefield were not as well equipped as we are. But those who were this well equipped, they had the confidence of knowing they had the best possible armour that technology could give them. They probably had enough money, because these things were so expensive, enough money to afford good weapons, good shields. Most importantly, most of them would have had good training, and they would have had enough money to afford the most vital part of the knight's equipment.
War horses of the Middle Ages were always stallions, uncastrated male horses, prized for their spirit and courage. Typically, they measured 14 to 15 hands and weighed 1,000 pounds. Displayed with great ceremony at tournament and at war, they were bred to be strong, fast and steady, capable of repeatedly galloping into action. They were also trained to accept crowds, banners, noise and the blows of battle.
The horse was the knight's most valuable piece of equipment, and his first thought would be the feeding, watering and stabling of his mount. Sometimes the horses themselves were equipped with armour, either heavy quilted bardings or even mail or scale armour. This was incredibly expensive and very heavy, but it protected the knight's most valuable investment. So, here is the horse, and here is the squire. The problem is how to make them work together as a fighting unit. The mounted knight was made possible by 3 inventions. The first was this, the iron horseshoe. This meant that the horse could ride over any terrain. It was introduced in about the 4th century AD, and in Northern Europe it was essential, because there, the moist soil might soften the horse's hoof, make it very vulnerable to injury. The second was this, the stirrup, probably used by the Huns and introduced to the West by them. Third, the war saddle, with its high cantles, front and back. Now this acted exactly like a bucket seat in a sports car. The combination of stirrup and saddle was vital. The mounted knight rode long, that is to say with his legs straight, feet well forward, toes pointed down. Now with his legs braced against the stirrup and his buttocks firmly against the rear cantle, he was effectively locked into position. From this position he could absorb the shock of an attack.
The tactical advantages of all this were immense. Fighting in a chaotic mass, the knight could now strike savagely with his sword and thrust hard with his lance. The cavalryman's strength was backed up and braced by his horse. Without the stirrup and saddle, he would simply be knocked off his seat. But there was a problem, which drastically limited the number of knights on the battlefield. The problem was money.
In the year 806, Charlemagne, Emperor of the Franks, sent a military summons to the abbot of St. Quentin, calling him out, with your full contingent, complete with supplies and in full martial array, with arms, tools, all sorts of instruments of war, food and clothing. Every horseman shall have a shield, lance, longsword, short sword, bow, quiver and arrows. In your carts you shall have tools of every kind, hatchets, adzes, axes, pickaxes, iron spades and all other implements which are necessary against an enemy. The food in your carts shall be sufficient for 3 months, the arms and clothing for 1 year. Now the abbot would have had a servant for his armour, grooms for his horses, of which there might be 3, maybe 2 chargers and a hack for general everyday use. His men may have been tens or hundreds, all mounted, mailed and armed. The question was, who is going to pay for all this?
The knight was at the sharp end of a vast war machine, and something called the feudal system made it all possible. Under feudalism, every landowner made some contribution of weapons or warriors to his local nobleman, who then provided the same service to his king. The entire system was created for the benefit of the knight in armour. But who exactly was he? To become a knight was difficult and by no means automatically inherited. A boy of good family would begin to learn the use of arms and horsemanship as soon as he could walk. At the age of 7 or 8, he would be sent away as a page to the court of his father's lord and would receive constant training. From now on, his greatest ambition was to achieve knighthood and distinguish himself on the battlefield. As a teenager, he became a squire or shield bearer to a knight, carrying his reserve arms, leading his extra horse. If he saw combat, his duty would be to protect his master if wounded and to take charge of his prisoners. In his off hours, he continued his training, because one day he would be expected to fight.
Among the many skills the knight needed to learn was this, the use of his primary weapon, the lance. This was an ash shaft of 8 to 10 foot long, with a small point on the end, sometimes with a crossbar to prevent it from getting stuck in the target if it penetrated too far. As with all his weapons, the best place to learn this was at the tournament.
In the joust, the lance was held on the left, across the horse's head. At war, its use was more varied.
Another method was to hold it low to the right side. In this low hold, the lancer was better able to redirect the angle of attack at the last moment. The overarm hold was excellent for close-quarter fighting, especially against foot soldiers. The left side of the horse was always difficult to defend, as the lancer would have to twist round to defend that side. It was part of his skill in controlling the horse to ensure that he never took an attack on this side.
The training was now complete. And by the age of 21, our squire would be an experienced warrior, ready to take on the responsibilities of knighthood. The ceremony of dubbing, or a doublement, that created a knight was full of symbolism. The sword was blessed on an altar, being itself the shape of a cross, its 2 edges symbolizing justice and loyalty. The squire swore oaths never to lie, to honor women, to attend mass, and to fast on Fridays. Then another knight or a lady would take the sword and tap him 3 times on the neck. He would then stand and receive the collé, a deliberate blow of the hand. This was the last insult he could ever receive without retaliation and bloodshed. He was now a knight, ready for a fight anytime, anywhere. With the idyllic medieval countryside around us, our squires have become knights, wreaking their havoc thus far with ancient armour made mostly of mail. But as the Middle Ages drew to a close, styles changed for the well-dressed knight, and plate armour became all the rage.
This is an armoured knight of about 1250 AD. From this date on, a new breed of armourers tried to incorporate as many pieces of plate as they could into the mail armour. They started down here. The knees were always vulnerable. Sometimes they were covered with mail leggings, but mail was extremely heavy. So these were a better alternative. Just knee cops strapped behind the knee to protect it. Gradually, they developed into upper and lower sections that covered a little bit more, and then up to the cuisse, which covered the thigh. So the leg is very well protected with the cuisse, the knee cop, and below, the ancient design that the Greeks and Romans knew well, the greave, which fitted not only on the front, but also on the back of the lower leg. Next, they went to the arms. Now, this is where the art of articulation comes in. These rivets hold each of these small pieces in place to make it completely flexible, and for the arm, of course, it needed to be. Your arms were expected not only to hold a shield, but also to wield a sword. So the construction they came up with was this, the lower vambrace, which encloses the lower arm, This, which is an elbow cup, serves the same purpose as the knee cup and is also articulated. Up here, we cover the shoulder, and this was the pauldron, which covered over the breastplate and completely protected the shoulder. Next, the body itself. The back plate, often in a single piece, was attached at the top and around the sides to the breastplate, which is in two parts, mainly for additional strength. This part was called the placket, and underneath the placket you'll find the fold. Now, the fold is made of a number of pieces which are all articulated, partly so that the knight could ride his horse, but also because in combat you'd be lifting your legs and running about quite a bit, so you needed a lot of flexibility above the leg. And also these, which are called tassets, which covered over the junction between the top of the cuisse and the bottom of the fold. Next, we had gauntlets. These are actually among the most difficult pieces to make. Each one has to be individually fitted to the person wearing it, and every finger needed to be articulated. Finally, the head. Most knights preferred this, the pig-faced bassinet. A single piece of steel, and then this visored face here, hence the pig. It had eye slots. These breathing holes, note that there are more on the right side than on the left. This was because in battle, or indeed in tournament, you were more likely to receive a lance on this side than on that side, so you had fewer holes. Underneath all this, of course, our knight no longer needed his mail hauberk. So he wore an arming doublet with all the mail in all the right places. Right, I think it's time to strip him down.
Metalsmiths created the steel of the Middle Ages by heating iron and carbon together in a subtle and laborious process that had developed over 1,000 years. And in truth, even today we don't fully understand how they did it. But we do understand how it changed the way knights could fight on the battlefield.
All right, guys, over there. Now, as plate armor improved, the shields got smaller and smaller. Truth is, you don't really need a shield because you're wearing it. That meant that your left arm was now free. And that in turn meant that you could use longer weapons, especially longer swords. So what I'd like you to do is to come and choose some of these swords. I'd like some of you to keep with your shields and use some of the other weapons we have here, maces, flails, axes. So, who's going to have a long sword? Aalspieß. It's an eel spear, very nasty. Okay, 2 more long swords, another long sword. That's a two-hander, yeah. I would get rid of your shield for that one. All right, so mix it up, try new routines, try out these new weapons, see what a difference it makes.
Since plate was less vulnerable to existing weapons, knights now carried smaller shields. This made them much more agile, but maintaining that agility required special training.
Right, listen, the training for a knight in full plate armor included jumping on to his own horse. He had to learn to pull himself up a ladder just by his arms. He had to run an obstacle course and come out the other end fighting. So, we've got an obstacle course for you. There it is. You pick up a spear, you throw the spear into the target, you run through here, get over the hay bale, pick up a sword, hit the mail, go through the tunnel, get onto the horse, get off the horse, go to the wood, chop the wood, and you're finished. All right? You ready for that?
All right. I'll set an example for the team and go first. This obstacle course is our medieval-style version of those used by modern soldiers. Troops in today's armies wear 70-pound packs on their backs. But I'm lucky. My gear weighs only 60 pounds, and it's evenly distributed over my whole body. In the Middle Ages, the best armor was custom-made, precisely fitted to the knight's exact measurements. Getting through the obstacle course is less of a problem than it might seem.
All right, you lot, you try it.
If our team seems a bit clumsy, remember this is only their first go at the course. With practice, they'd be experts. Constant training like this, as well as superior equipment, made the knight in his heyday truly formidable. But nothing is forever. Our team is now used to fighting as knights in plate armour. Unfortunately, during the Middle Ages, as well as today, weapons kept getting better. So the armour had to get better as well.
The armourer's most extreme answer was this, the Gothic style, originating in Germany. These corrugations added strength to the armour without increasing weight. This was a masterpiece. Every surface is turned, smoothed, streamlined, fluted. Look at these feet, articulated. Every single item here is articulated together in order to protect every part of the body. The steel itself was well tempered now. It could not only deflect blades and arrows, but even an axe blow would have difficulty getting through this. The armourer was approaching perfection.
Look at our knight now. Fully clad in Gothic armour, he is master of the field. His superb skill at arms and his equipment allow him to fight off 7 men at once. They have little chance of piercing his plate. But not even a perfect suit of armour could protect him forever. New weapons were coming that would spell doom for the knight in armour. By the 16th century, the arrival of cannons and infantry guns on the battlefield had changed the face of warfare. Suddenly, the idea of a man completely covered in a metal shell became ludicrous.
The knight in armour was finished. In mail, then in plate, he'd ruled the battlefield for over 1,000 years. And now, you could knock him over with ease. This time, he wouldn't be getting up.